Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our webinar on leading innovation in uncertain times. I was just thinking to myself before we started, I wonder if I can get through this webinar without mentioning the C word. And I'm going to give it a go because certainly in the UK, restrictions are lifting. And I think when we think about innovation, there are many opportunities to innovate our way through uncertain times. And there are also many issues that are creating uncertainty in our world of work, in our lives, and in society in general. And I think it's really important to think broadly about those when we think about innovation challenges. And today we're going to talk about innovation in the context of organizational innovation and thinking about how you can lead for innovation in your organizations. So Zach, if you can move to the next, before we move to the next slide, let me just introduce who's on the call with me. So my name is Joe Nagel and I'm the Innovation Director at the Innovation Beehive. And at the Innovation Beehive, we work with organizations to build innovation ecosystems, to build innovation leadership capability, and to develop cultures that enable innovation to thrive. And Zach, who I'll ask to introduce himself now, is our capability director. So Zach, over to you for a quick hello.
Hi, so surprisingly enough, I'm Zach, and I'm the capability director with the Innovation Beehive. And that means my role to give people the capability to do what they want. That means the drive, the motivation, the desire to want to do it. Now in leaders, that means how can we get them to bring people along on the journey so that they achieve their company goals as effectively as possible. Now my history is in leading a broad range of teams, actually from just 2 people up to well over 1,300 people. So in multidisciplines as well. So between that and the innovation, we've got you covered on leadership, and we're going to talk about that today.
Absolutely. And just to say, this webinar is being recorded. I think you'll have had a slightly robotic voice tell you that when you joined. None of you are on camera, so your faces won't be seen, your names won't be listed on the recording. But that does mean that if you drop off for any reason, or you need to go to another meeting at any point, or you want to share this with your team, it'll be on YouTube later in the week, and you'll receive a link by email. So Zach, can you move on to the next slide? So innovation is quite the buzzword in business circles at the moment. You can see here 668 million, I think that's the right number of zeros, yes, 668 million hits on Google. And Zach, if you just click again. So that was in 2018 when we first developed the innovation ecosystem, which we're going to give you a whistle-stop introduction to today. And I did a quick Google yesterday, and you can see on the next image, Zach, that we now are up to 1.85 billion hits on Google when you search for the word innovation. So innovation has become a really hot topic and is a really important topic for consideration when it comes to leadership in organizations. You know, innovation leads us into the future, there is no question. But I think you'll agree that with so much written about innovation online, it actually raises quite an important question for us, and that is, what is innovation? Because as you can see from the screen here, this isn't the most helpful definition in history. You get this a lot in dictionaries, don't you? Innovation is the action or process of innovating. Great, useful. It could be more helpful for sure. So let's have a quick conversation. I did, for those of you who joined just before 11, I did put a note into the chat box, and I'll send another one now to say type here. We'd love to get your thoughts. Just type into the chat box and share what your thoughts are on what innovation is, and we'll share those with the group. And in the meantime, Zach, what is your definition of innovation?
Well, I don't want to skew anyone else's definition, but I've heard it is a number of different things. Do you want my full official version?
I want your thoughts on it, Zach.
Interesting. I think there needs to be a number of elements in it, Joe. There needs to be something about creativity, of course, but there also needs to be something about momentum or progress, and also the end result of that momentum or progress. So something around adding value in something. Because then you've got the creative part, then you've got the some sort of continual process, and then you've also got the output.
What I like about what you said there, Zach, is that it's about output. So it's a process, but it must lead to something. And I can see that some comments are coming in. So seeing things that others miss, I think that's a really valuable insight, actually. One of the mistakes that are often made in innovation, and Zach and I talk a lot about this when we run workshops, is that we often start with ideas and we come up with a creative solution. If you watch Dragon's Den, you'll see a lot of inventors going on there. And the first question they get asked is, well, what's the market size? And they don't know what their market is because they've just come up with an idea. Seeing something that others miss is often about focusing on the problem that others have missed, not necessarily finding some eureka solution that others have missed. You find the problem and then you can find the solution. Really insightful point there. Building on something that already exists, adding functionality or addressing a different problem. I love that comment, Craig. And what you're talking about there hits on a really important part of innovation, which again is often overlooked actually, which is what's called sustaining or incremental innovation. So a lot of people, when they hear the word innovation, they think of disruption, and that's about coming up with something completely new. It's about changing a market completely. But actually, there's going to be a huge amount of value that exists in your existing products and services, as you say, by addressing a different problem, by addressing a different market. So actually build on what you have. Don't always think you have to reinvent the wheel when it comes to innovation. And some nice comments here: insight, ideas, foresight, and future outcomes. Loving the future outcomes point there. It's really important that you know what you can do with the ideas. And the way that you know what to do with the ideas is by grounding them in insight. Also enjoying the use of the word foresight there, but a future thinking maybe. Wonderful. Thanks, everybody. That's great. Now you're here to talk about leading for innovation. So my next question for you is, as a leader, why is innovation important for you? So again, we're having our chat up front.
We're making people work this morning, Joe.
Absolutely. So for me, innovation is important as a leader because I see it as driving forward the future of my business and the future of my team. So, if we're not constantly thinking what next, then we're missing opportunities, but we're also standing still. And as we know, in the way our markets are structured, the way our economy is structured, if you're standing still, too often you're moving backwards. And we work a lot with heavy industry and innovation in heavy industry. And one of the challenges that they have, and again, this speaks into disruption in the sort of technical sense of the word, but one of the challenges that large infrastructure-based organizations have is they find it hard to innovate because they kind of have to stand still because their entire business model is based on infrastructure that already exists, that was very expensive, had huge capital investment up front, and often they can't just shake that up. So that's where the sustaining innovation piece that Craig was talking about really comes into play. But some stuff coming in on the chat. Why is innovation important? Well, the market constantly changes. We need to keep up. If not, we'll be ahead of the curve. Absolutely. And one of the things about being ahead of the curve is often the people who are at the very front. You'll see some sort of unicorns that are really spearheading. But a lot of people who are at the very front of the curve are often the ones who make all the mistakes. And then the people who follow them are the ones who can learn from those mistakes and actually really optimize the innovation. So to another point that's come through, to become the market leader, being the market leader is absolutely the goal, but you don't necessarily need to be first to market with a new product or service to be the winner. To keep self and team engaged and challenged as opposed to stagnation. Absolutely. And I'm sure, Zach, you're loving the reference there to motivation and mindset in the team, as well as just thinking about the outcome of the innovation process. How to focus on the proposition, why not? I love that. That's a really good point. It's a good question to ask in insight, in idea generating, and also further down the line, once you've done your prototyping and testing, loop back to the beginning of the process. And again, ask why not. Brilliant. And just on the first follower piece, sometimes much better. Fast follower. I've not seen that phrase before, but I really like fast follower. There's a great video online of people dancing in a field, and one person starts the dance. And the point the video is making is that it's the second person who joins them that actually creates the movement. It's worth thinking about in the context of innovation. Thanks, everyone. Now I'm going to hand over to Zach, who's going to talk us through innovation from a leader's perspective.
I sure am, and a few things besides. So hello, everybody. Joe, thank you for the introduction there. It was a really good overview of innovation generally and what it means for leaders. But I, of course, just like everybody else, have noticed the explosion in inverted commas, innovation. Generally, even if you look at LinkedIn, for example, the number of people that have innovation somewhere in their job title or in their CV on LinkedIn is immense, and just as you identified with Google, is growing exponentially. Now, I have to admit that I myself experience some innovation bias. And what I really mean by that is that when I first got into the innovation space, innovation to me was what a lot of people stereotypically think of in innovation, which is, for example, the colorful soft play areas in offices, some 10% time or 20% time, and all of the kind of areas which some of the big, more visible companies have put into place. But those things alone don't make a company or a team innovative in any way whatsoever. But those obvious things, maybe they're useful. And very often they are what you see in the bottom there in the tangible zone. So if we start at the bottom, the physical environment, that's very much all about having a creative space, physical space, or an area in which you can drive creativity forwards and be as innovative as possible. But to do that, of course, you need to have structure and processes in place. You need to be able to give people the time and the space in order to do it. And then, of course, you need to have people trained. So they need to be capable to come up with great ideas. And coming up with great ideas is not a case of just saying, go and have a brainstorm. It's a bit more complex than that if you want to have a specifically strong output. Now, those three sections there are what we call the tangible zone. That means it's the stuff you can really see. And a lot of companies try and put those in place, and they do it successfully. You can find the internet is littered with examples of people that have put in place great capability, great structure, and a physical environment. And they are important. But the difference, which makes the difference, the things which turn great leaders of innovative teams into even better leaders of innovative teams, the battleground, if you like, is the part with mindset and behaviors. That's the part where we actually build a mindset of creativity and innovation into our teams as we are leading them. It becomes part of our day-to-day process. It's not something we do between 2 and 4 on a Friday afternoon. It's something which is done through let's say spectacles, through a lens of creativity. So it becomes a mindset, and our behaviors fall out of that. So I think that's quite important to reflect on. The other thing, just to spell out, is that a lot of people feel that innovation is all about, who knows, the new sexy product innovation, the iPhone of whatever it might be, which quite often just fails and falls on its head. But actually, innovation and creativity is in the reach of everybody, every single one of our team members, because it could be innovating a new business process. That could be a tweak to an existing business process, or it could be a staff experience or a customer experience. Innovation is everywhere, and it doesn't need to be disruptive and exponential in its nature. So innovation is everywhere, and we as leaders should be encouraging that in the mindset and behaviors of our team. But there are other behaviors and mindsets of leaders, aren't there, Joe?
Absolutely. Well, when you think about it, if innovation leadership, if the battleground for innovation is focused on behaviors and mindset, then really what our people need from us as leaders is the same as what they've been looking for through the uncertainty that we've all been living through for the last 18 months and before that. I'm not going to use the C word. The pandemic has driven the need for certain behaviors in our people, which are from leaders, and the desire for those in our people. And those behaviors that people are looking for are the new normal in terms of what people are looking for from leadership. And you can see them on the screen here, and they're very different to what you might have talked about looking for from leaders 10, 15, or even 2 years ago. They're focused on trust. People need to be able to make trust leaps when it comes to innovation. People need to have the confidence in the direction that's been set. They need to have confidence in the psychological safety net that's been put in place for them, that they can trust their leader, that they know that if they fail, if the idea that they've put forward doesn't work, that's going to be celebrated. That's going to be a win. Because if they don't trust that they're going to be able to do that, then ultimately they won't do it. Credibility is going to be important, because leaders are the people who set the process, set the structure, set the direction. They need to have credibility that people are going to go with them, that people are going to follow them through this innovation process. Because in innovation, when it comes to behaviors and mindset, feels uncertain. but actually it is the road to certainty. It is the road to prosperity, to sustainability, and to business resilience. Leaders are going to need compassion, because actually, I keep using the F word, I keep saying failure, because failure is integral to innovation. It's how innovation happens. Now, leaders are going to need to show compassion to their people in order to enable and facilitate and enable failure to replicate, because the more failure you have, as we're going to show later in one of the examples we use, the greater your failures, the greater your opportunities for innovation. But at the same time, you need stability. So you need a process in place. You need people to know what it is that they're doing when it comes to innovation. And you need a clear direction. You need this route, this aim that people are working towards, because if they don't have that, then you're going to have sort of scattergun creativity, people investing time, your organization investing money and resources, but ultimately it isn't going to deliver anything. And innovation is about creating something new, whether it's building on something you already have, or whether it's seeking to disrupt your market. So you need hope. Your people, you need to instill hope in your people, and therefore you as a leader need to be hopeful. And we've developed, and I know a number of you on the call have been in webinars that we've run recently, but we've developed a model for leadership through uncertain times. And we are absolutely certain that these 5 practices of 4.0 leaders, these exceptional leaders that we've worked with over the years, will enable you, if you practice these, to deliver innovation leadership for your people. So leading in head, which is all focused on strategic thinking, on tactics and operations. So tactics, operations, maybe not the most obvious things to think about when it comes to innovation. But let's think about what we said innovation is. Ultimately, innovation is something that has to deliver value. If you're going to deliver value from your creativity, well, you need to be able to say, well, this is how we're going to implement it. But that needs to be tempered by leading in heart, which is about empathy with your people and empathy with your customers. It's about being there, giving compassion when people fail. It's about seeking to deeply understand the world of your customers so that you can get to the heart of the problem. And you're not just leaning on the operations and the tactics that you already know work. You're open to new ideas and newness. So, the symbol for the next one, leading in health, is a weighing scale, but actually you need to hold leading in head and leading in heart in tension as you go through the innovation process and as you build an innovation ecosystem in your organization. Leading in health is important too. So leading in health in the Leadership 4.0 framework is about well-being, it's about safety, it's about supporting your people. Your people are going to need loads of support as they go through the innovation process. They're going to need that compassion for when things fail. But fundamentally, the thing that you need to build as a leader when it comes to leading in health, you need to build a culture of psychological safety, where it is okay to fail, where it is okay to put an idea out there, and you're not immediately going to get naysayers in the team saying, well, that won't work, or, oh, well, we've tried that before. As a leader, it's your responsibility to create the behaviors and the mindset in your team which enable people to feel safe to put their ideas forward. Leading in habit is crucial too. It's about making all of these practices, head, heart, health, and history, making those a habit. But there's something more to this too. It's about making a habit of learning and making a habit of saying it's okay to fail. This is important in the context of innovation. We're going to see it in multiple examples as we go through the webinar series and through the webinar today. But actually making a habit of learning and making that a cultural habit in your team is crucial. And it's where the Leadership 4.0 practice of leading in habit really comes into its own. And finally, leading in history. So leading in history is about living with purpose and leading with purpose. Now, the first element of the innovation ecosystem, which we're going to talk about shortly, is called the direction. And building a direction is about setting a strategic purpose for the innovation efforts in your organization. Now, if you can align that not only to the business processes, but also to the motivations that exist within yourself and within your people, you're going to be leading in history. And it's really important to make that connection between the business strategy, between the innovation vision for your organization, and between the direction that you all feel inside yourselves. So it's about connecting on an emotional level to the innovation efforts that you're setting out. Zach, I'm done with that. Is it over to you now, or is it over to me?
Why don't it's my turn, I think.
Your turn, I think. People have heard
Yeah,
enough.
my turn. Over the last 13 years, our founder, and us, of course, but our founder, Mark O'Keefe, has been working across the world in some of the world's most innovative organizations. And of course, in working in innovative organizations, you're exposed to very creative teams and people that work cohesively together in different ways, and see how those people then use tools in certain ways, or then are aligned to certain structures in the business and so on, so that they have a clear innovation output. Now, what he learned from that was that there are 4 principal unified elements which all those teams and all those organizations have. And he put this together in a book called The Innovation Ecosystem, which if you want it, it is available on Amazon. And of course, we strongly recommend that you get it, although the book is not the purpose of the webinar and the webinar series today. It's actually to tell you a little bit about each of those 4 elements. And then as the web series goes on, we will dig deeper into all of them. So just super high level for this bit now, the direction, as Joe mentioned, is all about having that clear vision, that end goal, that thing we want to get to help us stay motivated and driven along the path to actually getting great innovation done. The second element is the environment. That's about having a climate which encourages innovation. The third element, the engine, is about having the right structures and processes in place to enable innovation. And the last one, the enablers, is about having the right tools in order to move forwards through the engine and the environment to get to the direction. Oh, Joe, was that simple enough, do you think?
Very simple, very succinct, wonderful.
We are going into more detail in the following webinars, but we're going to break down each of those 4 elements now, starting with the direction. So the direction, as Joe mentioned and as I mentioned, is all about having that kind of end goal, that thing we want to get to, that vision, so that of what we want from innovation, so that we know where we're going. Now, it doesn't need to be quite as specific as you might think, but it does need some level of depth. Now, when my sister and I were young, we really loved the Disney cartoon version of Alice in Wonderland. But it is, of course, entirely possible that you've also read the book Alice's Adventures in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll, or it could be you've watched one of the many other versions of the story in film or cartoon or whatever. And you may remember my favorite scene, which is where Alice is lost in, I think it's Told You Would, and she comes across the Cheshire Cat. And essentially, she asks the cat, which way should I go? And the cat says, well, it depends where you want to get to. And she replies, well, it doesn't really matter where. And in which case, the cat replies, it does not matter which way you go. And of course, the point is that if you don't have a clear sense of where you're trying to get to, doesn't need to be necessarily detailed, but a clear sense of where you need to get to in terms of a direction, then you will not end up in the place you need to get to. So we need a rough idea of that destination. But what does that mean? Well, firstly, having some sort of inspiring vision of what innovation can get you to is an absolutely essential part of your business success. And that vision should then be translated into a strategy, which then will filter through the other elements, as we will see shortly. The strategy should be aligned to the delivery of the business strategy. So you can't have an innovation direction which is completely separate from your business strategy, because those two will butt up against each other and won't come to life at all. You should be able to articulate very clearly for everybody how it's aligned, so that people can buy into both the business strategy more deeply and also the innovation direction specifically. So one thing to think about is, do you know what your innovation strategy is in your organization? Who owns it? How have you developed it? And do you understand the different areas of focus? What the things that you are able to innovate on? And do you know how it contributes to delivery of your overall business plan or business strategy? And just to give you an idea, you need detail, but you don't need as much detail as you might consider. So for example, in Facebook's 10-year innovation roadmap, there are a couple of really interesting points to note. Firstly, if you look at the structure, you can see it on the screen here in front of you. You can see that they've planned across 3 principal buckets. That's along the bottom: ecosystems, products, and technologies. Now, in the first 3 years, the plan was just to embed and iron out the Facebook platform itself, which they did. What works, what doesn't work, and to continue evolving it. The next 2 years, years 3 to 5, was to expand the platform with complementary products, so video, messenger, purchase of Instagram, and so on. Now, years 5 to 10, and this is the important part about innovation direction, That was all about exploring connectivity. So AI, virtual reality, augmented reality. But what's interesting is that, I don't know if you can see, hopefully you can just about see, that there are categories for innovation which they planned for, but they don't know the detail because the world changes so rapidly. They knew that they wanted to go into AI, but they didn't know exactly what that would look like 5 to 10 years from now, but they still have a direction because it's in there as a whole, but the detail is not, and that detail will evolve as you go through. So we don't need to be deeply detailed in the long-term vision of what we're trying to achieve in innovation, but we just need the general direction. And by doing that, we're going to be able to remain agile as we go along and not necessarily bound by the detail of a long-term direction. Good. Joe, it felt like I cantered through that.
That was
I know
great.
we're going into more detail on the next call, but
Yeah, no, that was brilliant. And you know, just thinking about what Zach talked about there, you know, the importance of having the direction, but being agile in building that direction. It's a really important point actually, because sometimes there's a risk that when you set your innovation direction, there's a risk that you almost articulate the solution when you should be articulating the problem. So when we run idea generating sessions with clients, we develop a concept called a how might we question. And we often challenge our clients back and say, well, hang on a minute, the way you have worded that statement is basically saying, well, the solution is embedded into it. You know, so for example, if it said, how might we serve all of our customers by using drones to deliver packages? Well, actually, implicit in that is the solution that we're driving towards. So that's not innovating. That's not giving space for creativity. So we would cut that in half and say, how might we serve our customers better? You know, so that's what we mean by being broad and not too specific, and that's kind of the reason you would do that. Now, again, thinking about what Zach just talked about, certainly I can see some really clear need for those practices, those 4.0 leadership practices in driving the direction of the organization. Obviously, to be a leader of innovation, you're going to need to use all 5 of those practices, but it's important to recognize where some of them are going to be more amplified than others. Now, I would say that setting an innovation direction focused on strategy, you're definitely going to need to focus on leading in head. You're definitely going to need to focus on leading in history because, well, you know, leading in head, obviously, it's about strategy. So you're going to need to know the lay of the land before you set your innovation direction. Leading in history, you need an inspiring vision for your people to get behind, to exercise their creativity and to drive their creativity. But I think you also need leading in heart really, really strongly in the direction piece, because you need to understand your people and their motivations. And you also need to understand your customers and their pain points. So definitely when you're thinking about setting your innovation direction, you need to be dialing up the leadership behaviors of leading in head, leading in heart, and leading in history. And we will be digging into that in a lot more depth in the next webinar, the details of which will be on the final slide. But Zach, we can move on to the environment. So the environment is really the cultural context in which innovation is happening in your organization. And leaders, there are 3 things that leaders need to focus on when they're building the innovation environment. If I can get the next slide, Zach. First off is encouraging experimentation. And as I keep on talking about, a culture where it's okay to fail. You know, failure is actually the driver of innovation. If you look at the history of capitalism over the last 400 years, it is littered with failure. And if you look at the history of most organizations, even the successful ones, they are littered with failure. I think if you Google the phrase Google graveyard, you'll be able to see what I mean. Failure is the driver of business success in a completely counterintuitive way, but it's true. And that is the driver of innovation. It's also important to seek to connect employees across silos. So if you're a leader of a team, your team may be one team, one function. What would be great is if you can bring other teams and other functions into your innovative thinking, because actually getting different perspectives, different eyes on a problem can be really advantageous when it comes to creativity and innovation. And finally, that direction that Zach just talked us through so succinctly and so clearly, that must be a core part of your communication to your people almost all the time. There will be moments when a communication simply doesn't call for it, but it just needs to be part of the way you talk to your people, that constant reinforcement of the message that your creativity is valuable. It's safe to fail in this environment. We are people who are going to constantly think, how can we do this better? That needs to be the message of leadership in your team and in your organization. So some things to consider. Do I talk to my people or consider the innovation imperative in my day-to-day work? If you don't, just start doing it. Just start thinking about how you can talk to your people about the importance of innovation and how you can embed simple creative thinking and creative processes into your day-to-day working. Do I take calculated risks and experiment? And we put that word calculated in there. And honestly, I feel that because I'm an innovation director, I feel that's a nod to the more cautious amongst us. It's hard to take a calculated risk if you're truly innovating. And sometimes what you need to take, and what might be a better word to use, is small risks, right? So you want to take a small risk and then learn from that risk. And then you can start calculating when it comes to taking the bigger risks. Do I share my knowledge with others and seek to collaborate? That's about crossing down silos, breaking down barriers, and even looking outside of your organization for inspiration, for stimulus, for collaboration. A lot of organizations do that, and it can be really valuable. And do I feel it's okay to fail sometimes, and do I encourage that behavior in others? And we have an example of a failure on the slide right now, because we've put a typo, and I hope you all spotted it, but that is just an example of how it's okay to fail. So Zach, next slide.
Yeah, and we just had a quick comment about strategy being often pretty immature in most organizations. It's absolutely true. Strategy is usually put after senior management set goals, and then organizations try to put a strategy in place to reach the goals. But of course, it should be the other way around.
Absolutely. It's a really good point about the immaturity of strategy in large organizations, and this idea that somehow you've done it if you've made the roadmap. No, you've done it when you've got to the end of the roadmap and you've delivered it, and that's why you need innovation, and that's why you need to think holistically about what innovation looks like in your organization. But just an example of this building a culture where it's okay to fail. Jeff Bezos at Amazon, he once said in team communication, we have to grow the size of our failures as the size of our company grows. Failure and invention are inseparable twins. He sums it up better than I did. Innovation is the driver of realized value. There is no question about that. And there are countless examples of Amazon failing and learning, and then having a market-breaking success. So Alexa is an example of that. A lot of the technology that went into Alexa actually was developed when Amazon had a go at making mobile phones. Didn't work, but they got all the technology they needed to then crack on with Alexa. So great example there. As Amazon is a great example of building that environment. Jeff Bezos, whatever you think about Amazon more broadly in terms of employment practices, etc., the fact is they are a highly innovative company, and we should learn from companies like that, learn the positives, and then learn what not to do as well. So thinking about the environment and thinking about leadership 4.0, again, leading in health comes into play here for me, because if leading in health is about people's well-being, and it's about creating a safe environment for people to operate, well, actually thinking about the failure piece, you need as a leader to build an environment where people feel it is psychologically safe to fail, and where people feel it is psychologically safe to put out a blue sky idea, and it's not going to be shouted down. They're not going to be told there's no time for this. Another example from Amazon actually is the institutionalized yes. So if someone went to their manager and said, hey, I've got an idea, the manager can say no, but if they say no, they have to write a one-page explanation of why they're saying no. So actually it works it's easier to say yes and to do something with an idea that comes forward. And yeah, further down the road, you may discover that idea isn't right and doesn't make sense, and won't work. But actually, that institutionalized yes gives people this psychological safety to try and to put their idea out there. Now, if you're going to do that, it's worth putting structures around it. So, think about how are people going to submit these ideas to their managers so that they've done some of the thinking already. And, putting structures in place to support the environment is important. But leading in health, crucial. Leading in heart is also important because if you're creating this environment, this is all about connecting with your people. So you need to be able to empathize with them. You need to be able to understand them. So leading in heart is crucial. And leading in habit, because if you consistently deliver on the promise that you've said in the things that you say, and your behavior consistently reflects that, then people are going to feel safe. They're going to feel that they want to contribute. But all it takes is one or two slip-ups in a leader for the culture to completely change. And we work with many organizations building their organizational cultures, developing their organizational cultures, but also mitigating the results of problems in their organization cultures. And I can tell you from experience that, one mistake from a leader can have a really negative and long-term impact on the organization's culture. So making it a habit of doing the things that you say you're going to do is crucial in building a sustainable innovation environment. And Zach, if we can move on to the next slide, we'll talk about the engine. And if you just whip past this one. So the engine is really about the processes and the structures that you put in place in your organization. There's a number of things to consider. First off, and perhaps most importantly, is the need for new metrics to measure the effectiveness of your people when they spend time on innovation. This actually connects in with the environment because, there's that old phrase, what gets measured gets done. So if you're not measuring effectively for the culture that you're seeking to create, for the environment that you're seeking to create, then ultimately people won't do what you ask them to do within the environment because they know that they're either not going to have any benefit from it in terms of the performance management, in terms of the bonus structures or whatever structures you have in place, or worse, they are going to be spending time on innovation and then not have enough time for their day job and then potentially be penalized for not having achieved their objectives because they've been focusing on the thing you've been asking them to focus on as a leader. So new metrics are really important. And Clayton Christensen, in his book, The Innovator's Dilemma, where he actually articulated the concept of disruption, the sort of technical concept of disruption, which I won't go into detail now. But basically what he said was that organizations, well-established organizations, are built to ultimately fail in the face of innovation because they focus so much on the business as usual metrics. And once they have their infrastructure in place, they just service the infrastructure. Therefore, they miss opportunities. They don't structure themselves to seize new opportunities. So what he said was that the solution is to spin off companies which don't have the same business as usual metrics that your parent company has. Now, that's one solution. I actually think you can create micro spin-offs in your team effectively, where you give some people some time for new metrics, where they're measured by new metrics, and that time is their focused innovation time. Talk a bit more about that in the enablers, because when it comes to enablers, you need to give people the capability and the skills. You also need to give them the space and the time to innovate. But new metrics, really important. Structures and processes for innovation are really crucial too. We're going to talk about one example on the next slide when we get to it, but also partnering with external talent, external organizations, whether startups, whether other organizations, whether sort of industry bodies focused on innovation. There's lots of them out there. There will be one, I would imagine, for your sector or a tangential one to your sector. So look into those. Partnering with organizations like the Innovation Beehive to bring in that expertise and experience to drive forward the innovation process in your organization and to bring in that external perspective, and those fresh eyes can be really valuable. And also, the first question here in terms of questions to consider, I haven't really touched on, but it's actually really important. It's thinking about in the engine, who owns innovation in your organization? Now, often when I ask this in workshops, the general consensus is, well, everyone should own it. Yeah, absolutely. Everyone should contribute to it, but someone should own it, right? Someone should be the person who is ultimately responsible for it. So that may be you as the leader of your team. You may have an innovation director or a head of innovation, or you may indeed be a head of innovation. If that is the case, if that's the structure in your organization, it's not enough to sit back and wait for them to tell you what to do. You can go to them and say, I've got this idea. Here's what do I do with it? So take these opportunities that are there based on the structure that you have. And if there isn't anyone who clearly owns innovation in your organization, can you take ownership of it, or can you influence so that ownership can be put there? Knowing what successful innovation looks like, how you judge it, is really important. There's a white paper on our website about how to measure innovation. Anyone who wants it, type into the chat and I'll make sure I'll send you a copy. Do I look outside for fresh ideas and perspectives is a really important question, because if you don't have fresh eyes on your problem, or if you're not even looking outside of your organization, you may not even see the problem. But if you don't have fresh eyes on it, at best, you're only going to do what you've always done. And that is not innovation. And just the final question to consider, if you move on to the next slide, Zach, is what process do I have in place to actually take a problem and find a solution to it? And the process that we use at the Innovation Beehive is design thinking, also known as human-centered design. And the reason we like this is because of that human-centered piece. So empathy is gaining insight into the end user, into the end user's perspective, whether the end user is a customer, whether it's a user of an app on a phone, whether it's an employee, whether it's a stakeholder in your organization, whoever your end user is, you need to gain insight. You need to understand their world so that you can then define the real problems that they are facing. So, if you think innovation is all about, as Zach thought, beanbags and post-it notes, we don't get to beanbags and post-it notes until stage 3 of a 5-stage process. So we're halfway through the process before we even start thinking about creativity. So that ideas part is where we have those blue sky ideas. We be as expansive as we can. And it's absolutely important. It's the crucial part of innovation. But if it's not grounded in insight and empathy and defining the problem, then it's that scattergun approach to creativity that I talked about earlier. And then once you've done that blue sky thinking, once you've done that creativity, you need to come down the funnel, away from the blue sky. You need to come down, because ultimately you need to land on something to take action on. And the way you do that within this process is prototyping and testing. So you're learning constantly from these myriad failures that you're going to have of all these ideas, these blue sky ideas that aren't going to work once you test them. But out of that, you're going to take learning, and ultimately you're going to develop an idea that will solve the problem that you identified at the beginning of the process. So that's why it's so important to have a structure, because if there is no structure, then you're going straight in at the ideas, and ultimately you may put stuff out there that isn't really solving a problem. And again, I always use the example of Dragon's Den, but it's a great example of what happens when you don't solve a problem, you just come up with an idea. So thinking about Leadership 4.0, definitely for this, you're going to need leading in heart, because if you go down this route of this structure, the design thinking approach, you need to have other people's perspectives at the heart of your creative problem solving. Even when it comes to generating ideas, the more eyes you have on that problem, the better. So leading in heart is crucial. Empathy is essential to this. Obviously, it's a structure, and obviously the engine is about structures and process. So, you're going to have your head on for that. You need to be thinking about the strategic elements. You need to be thinking about the operational elements of the engine. And ultimately, you need to be delivering. So this engine is where you actually get things through the organization, get them out the other side. So leading in head is crucial for that. And you need to be consistent. One of the most common projects that we work on around innovation is creating a sense of consistency in organizations. So everyone is operating in the same way across the organization. They're using the same language, they're using the same process. So if one person from one team parachuted into another idea generating session, they'd be asking the same questions in the same way, using the same templates, using the same process, knowing that they're working towards the same goal. So leading in habit is a really useful practice to think about when building your innovation engine. And Zach, you're going to talk us through the 4th element of the innovation ecosystem.
Well, this is right up my street as capability director. I love tools, love being practical, love things which are actually going to progress me along through the great areas which we've talked about so far. Now, the enablers, of course, is all about those tools. It's all about giving people practical ways so that they are capable to do the job, to come up with wonderful things. Now, of course, we know that our workforce has diverse experience. They probably already hold all the answers to all your innovation challenges. We just need to tease those answers out of them, meaning that they need the skills and the tools to deliver great innovation. Now, what might that look like? Well, firstly, so many, and speak to your HR department, they'll stay the same. The best way to engage your teams is to have them involved in the business. So an engaged workforce is one where innovation is fun. It's not seen as a chore. It's something where it's easy to do, but it's encouraging for them to do as well. So think closely. Do you actively put ideas forward, or do you encourage your teams to actively put ideas forward and suggest new ways of doing things? If not, how can you do that? And have you invested in your creative skills and your team's creative skills, as well as just functional skills? It's because we actually need all types of thinking preferences to come up with wonderful ideas. And I've got some examples of practical ways that we've encouraged companies to do that in the past. I mean, the first one, the most obvious one in terms of a tool, is the famous Kickbox, the red box you see on the right there. So the Adobe Kickbox was designed, actually I met the guy who designed it in a conference in Florence a couple of years ago, and it was designed so that all employees could have the capability to create. So it's a downloadable box. You can still get it online now, and it contains everything that the would-be innovator might need in Adobe to create. Now, when it was released in Adobe, it was all about coming up with the idea, prototyping it and testing it. It was all packaged up in one neat red box. And there's a set of instructions in there, how to use different tools. There were notebooks. There was also a Starbucks gift card, a chocolate bar to keep their energy going, and a $1,000 prepaid credit card for all employees to build a prototype. Now, that may be beyond the budget of a lot of organizations, but there are simple things that you can do. But the output of that red box was that there are around 14,000 red boxes sent out in the early stages of it being launched. So that's quite a lot of creativity. Now, closer to home, we do a lot of work with Google. We're delighted to do so. And in order to help their charity partners try and drive creativity and innovation in Google's charities, we did a one-day session with them, but then we gave them tools. We showed them how to use the tools. They role-played using tools and had experience in doing them. But then we also gave them a book, which had further instructions and clarity on how to actually drive forwards. You can see it on the bottom there, the Innovation Beehive Toolkit. And that really helped them then to further embed those tools going forwards, because they practiced it and then they went on to use it over and over again. Now, in terms of leadership practices for tools, of course, we do need some kind of clear set of instructions and clear set of tools in our toolkit to drive forwards, and that's leading in head. But we also need to motivate people to use them, to want to be able to use them, and that's leading in heart. But of course, we want them to do it not just on a Friday between 2 and 4. We want them to make it a habit. So we need to drive leading in habit. And you can see where we're going here. We want them to do something with it. So of course, we want them to lead in history with it. We want to lead in history. Health. Joe, could we leverage health into it, or do we think?
Can you move to the next slide? I think that leads neatly on to the point I want to make on the next slide, actually. So that they are the 4 elements of the innovation ecosystem: the direction, the environment, the engine, and the enablers. And ultimately, that will output innovations. And what we recommend is every time you get an innovation coming out of your organization, whether it's a success or not, is that you loop back around and you just check that your organization's innovations ecosystem is optimized. So again, making a habit of that. But to Zach's point there about can we leverage leading in health into the enablers? We don't need to, right? Because these things are not singular. There's no point in having an engine without a direction and without an environment and without enablers. There's no point having a direction if you don't give people the tools and the process and the structure and the culture to actually deliver on that direction. So when we talk about the innovation ecosystem being made up of 4 elements, yes, it is. But ultimately, those 4 elements will only work if you have all 4 elements in place. And similarly, with Leadership 4.0, if you only focus on leading in head and leading in heart, you're going to miss the health, the habit, and the history. If you only focus in habit, well, what are you making a habit of if you're not focusing on the other 4? If you only focus on your people's health, then you're missing out on the productivity, the strategic direction, the empathy with customers, the purpose, you know. So actually, we're not going to try and shoehorn all 5 of these leadership practices into all 4 of the elements of the ecosystem. What we're going to be doing over the next 4 webinars is talking about the direction, the environment, the engine, and the enablers in turn, in depth, in detail, so that you can get a really clear overview of how all 4 of these play together and how all 4 of them are supported by all 5 practices of Leadership 4.0. So we're going to have fortnightly webinars over the next 4 weeks. Over the next 8 weeks. And the next one is going to be on the 3rd of August. So I'll send you a link to register for that. I hope you can attend. If you can't attend, I'll be sure to, everyone who has signed up for one of the webinars in the series will receive links to all of them, unless you tell me you don't want to, and that's fine if you'd rather not. But I hope that, you know, you get something out of it. Zach, if you look onto the next slide so people can see the date, I hope you get something out of it. And I hope you got something out of today's webinar, this sort of overview of how leadership practices can contribute to and can enable you to develop a really robust innovation ecosystem in your organization. Check out our YouTube channel if you want to learn more about those leadership practices. I can see in the chat, can you differentiate on leadership versus hierarchy, management, re-innovation? Actually, Alan, we've had a question come through, folks, on the difference between leadership and hierarchy and management regarding innovation. Now, that is something that we are going to go into in some depth on our next webinar, which is about leading, and on the one after that, about leading for direction and leading for the environment. So join those webinars to explore that in more depth. We'll also be talking on those webinars about decision making in the context of innovation as well as how to set a clear vision and how to build the culture of innovation in your organization. So look out for an email from me in the next couple of days with a sign up link for the future webinars. So sincerely hope you found that useful. It's been a pleasure to spend the morning with you. If you're in the UK, I highly recommend you get out into the sunshine now if you can. And if you're not in the UK, I hope it's as sunny there as it is where I am. So thanks everyone. Have a great rest.